All right, hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, April 17th, and we are at the beginning of week 3. You have just finished out your week 2 submissions, and we're going to start our session today with a discussion of we only had one peer review submission of Angry Bots this round, so we'll take a listen to that. And I'll take a moment here to discuss the Angry Bots composition as a whole. If you have any questions, either if you're in the live class and you have any questions, please let me know. I can answer those now. But if you're watching the archive, then if you have any questions after seeing the archive, please let me know. If you're having any issues with the Angry Bots composition or sound design, which was part of the week 2 assignments, or now in week 3, we are headed towards some more of the tech side of things and understanding how your music and sound effects actually work with the game. So we're going to be using game audio software known as Wise. We'll be starting that this week. And so if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Of course, after our peer review, I'll switch it over to the archive, which has a in-depth discussion of downloading and using Wise and getting started with your 2D platformer and then your Angry Bots projects. So that is our focus for today. Let's go ahead and take a listen, or let's talk about our Angry Bots composition first. So our submission here looks like it's set up and ready to go. All of the files are at least visually formatted correctly. When discussing the Angry Bots composition, we talked about the idea of a vertical composition. And this is a compositional approach of creating and setting up your music in a particular way to allow it to play back correctly in the game. And so as we switch into using Wise today, or not today, or this week, we will talk about that sort of setup overall. But when you have your tracks set up like this, this is kind of visually what I mean, or I'm referring to in a vertical composition, in that these tracks are vertically stacked up on top of each other. A question here in the chat, how is the best way to upload for the discussion? If you uploaded, or if you submitted for the game composition, then you should be fine. I just need to go pick it up off of FSO. So yeah, let me know in the chat if it's just up. Oops, where's my window going? If it's already submitted on FSO, I can just go pull that one. If not, if it allows you to, I don't know if it's going to allow you to upload through the chat, or you can. Oh, you submitted it. Okay. Then after I go over this first one here, I will pull your submission into Logic also. Excellent. Then we'll have 2 submissions to listen to. Okay, so this is the vertical representation of the music. The purpose of composing the music this way and ultimately bouncing it out this way is that you can add or subtract any piece of music, any of these 4 different layers, at any moment in time. And the game will ultimately have control over the volume and able to fade in and fade out any particular layer as needed. So we have 4 emotional sort of responses to different actions in the game. And in this case, they are 4 different layers of an action game. We have 3 different robots, and each one of those robots is represented by an individual piece of music or an individual layer of the composition. And then we also have the ambient cue, which is going to be a constant bed playing in the background or looping in the background during gameplay. So it's very important that these four cues are set up and formatted in a particular way so that they can play back properly in the game. And that way is that they all start at the same time, they all end at the same time. They're going to be in the same key so that there is no dissonance between the different pitches and the different melodies and harmonies. And they are going to be in the same tempo and time signature, so there's no rhythmic dissonance. If they were at different BPMs or different tempos, then it would be often sound like shoes in a dryer or things just randomly playing if they were all at different tempos. So we have some very consistent properties of each one of these. You have entirely a 2-minute long composition that is broken down into 4 layers. And those layers are representing mainly the idea of ambient and action, or really our focus compositionally is on intensity. As these different robots come out to attack in the game, then they are going to add a layer of action. They are going to add a layer of intensity. They're going to add a layer of instrumentation that represents that particular robot. So there is going to be percussion that represents the rhythmic layer, that often represents the pulse of the music, and what ultimately brings up the pace of the music. You have what is typically a harmonic layer that is there to support, often provides a bit more of the rhythm, a bit more of the groove, and then you also have a thematic instrument, whether it's a dedicated melody, whether it is a lead instrument that is more textural, whatever it is, but it's really identifiable to that robot. So when these new layers of instruments come in, it represents thematically the action when you're battling that robot. And you almost train the player to respond to these different music cues. So there is a format, a sort of consistent properties that all 4 of these layers will have, both rhythm, key, and also following a common chord progression so that they will all fit together no matter what combination. At that point, then you give the control of volume to the game, and the game can add a different layer and subtract a different layer at any time, and it will always make musical sense in any sort of order. So it's just 4 pieces of a full composition that play back together. The challenge here is to make sure that they don't clash when they play together. If you compose them as 4 different layers, then trying to bring them back together and hope they fit becomes more challenging. If you so there's the key and the challenge of making them all fit together compositionally, making sure that they are representing the particular robot, so thematically that they fit, and then that you have a constant increase in the intensity and the power of the music as each one of these battles ensue in the game. So once all 4 of them, they should all loop together, and they should all constantly play in sync in the background. When the game starts, the first cue will start playing, and then the game will add and fade in and fade out the different musical layers as needed. All right, so visually everything looks like it's set up and ready to go. We'll take a listen to this one here in just a bit. We also have our stingers over here. Now the stingers are set up to be strong impacts that hit very quickly at the start of the file and then fade out to silence. These look like they could be more rhythmic overall. I think I see a pulse in here, so we're going to watch out for anything that's rhythmic or tonal, so that since you're ultimately never sure when these are going to play, they're going to happen in reaction to the game. So there's no telling when the battles are going to start and stop. But we know when they do, one of these cues is going to play. And if there is, if it's tonal, then it has a chance of clashing against the main music. If it's rhythmic, it has a chance of clashing with the main music. So they're typically a strong impact and hit, a lot of low end and a lot of power, then often something in a higher register with an interesting sort of modulation or filter or reverb or effect or something like that that kind of cuts through the mix. And then they fade to silence very quickly. It looks like all three of these are going to sort of get cut off at the end, so we'll take a listen to that. All right, I think that's enough chatting. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the first one here. Let's go ahead and start. All right. So we have like an arpeggiator, a kind of outline of the progression as a whole. The arpeggiator gives a kind of a pulse, a little bit of a hint of the rhythms that are going to come up in the later cues. It's outlining the chord progression. We know generally what to expect when we come to the other action cues. The only main thing I hear here is that there isn't much change in the pattern or the instrumentation of the cue. Like once the instrumentation is established, it's pretty much set. The progression moves around, but I would like to hear maybe one or two more elements fade in and out over the course of the cue, just to provide some change beyond the chord changes. Let's go ahead and add the buzzer cue. Strong synth lead added here. I think there's a low kick drum in there. Everything works together. It loops properly. The two layers stay in sync very well. They kind of rhythmically lock in time. The melody works against the chord changes in the ambient cue. So everything is formatted and kind of prepared to work in the game. Maybe you could hear with this buzzer maybe either a little bit more percussion or some harmonic instrumentation, some chords or some rhythmic element that supports that strong lead line. I feel I hear the kick in the lead, but missing something else in between in the buzzer cues. Let's go to the spider cue. So this actually seems to be the pad that I might suggest for here. So this works well to support that buzzer, but on its own, like if I was attacked by one of these robots, which is actually, the spider bot is one of the more common ones, and this comes in, it doesn't add that much strong intensity. You got the pad, you got the other kind of higher kick, but needs some more rhythmic elements, needs something on maybe the 8th notes or even 16th notes to really kind of get that pace, pushing the pace a bit more. Compositionally, it all works together. The sound of it, the overall feel of all the synths, it really fits the vibe of the game itself. Just maybe a little bit more energy overall in that cue. So here we got the hi-hat, we got the faster kick drum, and we got another lead. So this definitely brings in more energy just kind of on its own. Everything's still formatted to fit well together, loops well together. Just going to bring all 4 of the layers in together. So you can definitely hear the buzzer and the mech, like the way the 2 melodic lines or those 2 synth lines kind of play off each other. Those work well together. But when I add and when I bring the spider cue in and out, there's not as much of a noticeable addition when it comes back in. So, not that you need necessarily, because those 2 lead lines, if you add a 3rd one in there, might just be too much overall. But if it could be either something more rhythmic, maybe a stronger bass line or some effect overall, would be the main thing to pay attention to. So, all right, that will work very well in the game. Will fit the vibe. Will structurally, like I mentioned, it will work properly in the game. So just some tweaks and suggestions to the composition. Let's go ahead and take a listen to these stingers here. Take these down. All right. 3 stingers. Those some of these rhythmic instruments might actually work as cool elements in the spider cue, or adding to whichever one. Well, the rhythmic, the kind of rhythm here, watch out for anything that's strongly rhythmic because it will clash, because it will not necessarily be triggered on a downbeat. So it could come in halfway through or just in some odd way and clash against the main music. So watch out for that. Something more in the line of this, but no fade-ins, and have it hit with a strong kick drum and maybe a whole bunch of reverb. But that one note that kind of fades and or like filter, like has a filter sweep to it or a phase or something like that, with a whole bunch of reverb and a big kick drum on it, will help to create that strong impact. And that's sort of the direction you want to go. So The first one without the fade on the front is certainly the closest. Watch out for these the mech and the spider stingers. All right, so good things to start with. I have the other one downloaded here. Let me go ahead and set that one up. Once it unzips here. There we go. All right. Get all of the tracks set up properly. And if you have any questions or comments as I go through this, please let me know. Oops. I guess I have to zoom in a little bit. All right. Think I'm good. Do that. Bring these down. We don't need to listen to this. Go back to this. All right. So everything, again, visually looks like it's formatted correctly. Start at the same time, ends at the same time. We'll loop together. I'm going to guess rhythmically everything's going to be set up properly. These look like the correct shape for stingers. Maybe could say that they look too low in volume just because they have to compete with this louder stuff over here. But really you want the hit up front and it fades out to silence. So let's go ahead and start with our ambient cue. Cool. So a cool texture overall. Lots of like good low end. There's a hi-hat in there that gives a little bit of that foreshadowing of what's supposed to come. Cool different layers coming in and out, and maybe a constant pad or something that kind of glosses over a couple of the holes in the between the notes and the chords. But it does progress, it does change. Let's go ahead and bring in the buzzer. Actually, before this, I did notice in the right channel that there was some crackling. Go back over here. And it's very subtle. And I don't know if it'll come through in the broadcast, but there's a little bit just crackling, and I don't know if it comes from a distortion or some clipping or something. Here is the buzzer. I think the mixture of the synth bass and the strings works well, but I think the bass is like at least an octave too low. you could probably, if you're looking for low-end bass here, you could probably take this synth and bring it up an octave, if not two, and put just a sub bass below that and play it as two layers that move identically to each other. Will give you a better tone overall. And then watch out for the constant trill strings going back and forth. It's a good effect, but it shouldn't probably be used kind of in solo just by itself. It should be peppered in against mostly legato strings. You can still do these kind of really minor kind of intervals all the way across the cues, but reusing that same articulation over and over again kind of gets fatiguing. Also would add percussion, something that you have, so you have the hi-hat. I think there is a little bit of percussion in the back, or maybe it's a kick drum that's really low or something like that, but a bit more power overall. I'm going to guess that the spider cue is too low in volume to compete against the other cues. Let's see, let me bring this up again. I would definitely have some stronger percussion by now. Something that gets the a faster pace happening. The arpeggiator helps. The kind of minor seconds kind of riff gets a little repetitive as it goes around. Although just that part, then these last little phrases that you throw in between work, but each time it's just so like that's fine, but just connect with a little bit more movement from one to the next. Mainly stronger percussion, more percussion by now. Let's go to the mech. I think we'll probably. So you got the bass. The drums are still kind of slow. Boom, tick, cat, tick. I mean, you just need to have layers in there that and just subdivide the beat. Half note, whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Just have different percussive elements on those different layers, or with combinations of those, so that you can kind of add and subtract what you need in these different layers. So those are the main thing that I hear would probably be more stronger percussion. The kicks in the buzzer feel a little bit out of time with the rest, just slightly. You definitely have like this kind of creeping vibe to it, like it's kind of stalking or something like that, which is cool. And the sound of the instruments and the everything again fits together. It loops together. All of that stuff works quite well. So. Yeah, so just I would add a stronger pulse through each one of those action cues. So let's go ahead to the stingers. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Again, bring up the volume of these action cues. Okay, thanks for the ideas in the chat here. Overkicked in some ways, undercooked in others. That's a good way of saying it. And more percussion. All right. 3 stingers. All right, so the third one, the spider here, probably has the best combination. You've got the kick and the synth on top, which works. The other ones just feel like the kick and crash cymbal. Probably even that those 3 hi-hat hits is even just a bit too rhythmic because you're not sure what it's going to be playing against. So, I mean, you do definitely need more when you just have a kick and a crash. I mean, that's the kind of the base layer overall, but add some hit and modulation like you have there. Drench it in reverb too. That'll add a good tail to it. And then, let's see. I mean, you might be able to cut these down in the bounce. It's probably better just to have them longer than shorter, but come on. You might be able to bounce them just like this for just a little bit shorter overall, but that depends. I mean, you don't want any of the reverb to be cut off. Yeah. So just something to consider overall. All right, so 2 good submissions gave us some good things to talk about. Again, if you're watching on the archive and you have any questions, please let me know. I will be providing the video feedback here as we progress through the week. We are using Wise this month for implementing your music and sound effects, and so your assignments this week are going to go through the process of getting everything set up and getting your music working in the game application. So, let me I lost this here. But I do want to go through the process real quick, and the archive will probably state this again, but it's never too bad to see it a couple times, and actually it has changed just slightly. So you are going to be downloading Wise today, or this week, and you go to the website audiokinetic.com. They are the manufacturers of this Wise software. It is audio software that allows you to take your music and your sound effects and implement them into the game. It is a very, very popular software used by lots of different very popular games. And when you download the software, it'll have you log in and download what is known as the Wise launcher. And of course, you'll be downloading the Mac version. And the Wise launcher looks like this. I think. Where'd it go? There it is. It looks like this. When you first first load it up, it'll probably give you a whole bunch of news and information. But you're going to go to download the main Wise application. And when you install a new version, you're going to want to use this version of 2016. All of our games are built using the 2016 version of Wise. And so make sure you do not install any of these 2017 versions, at least for the purpose of our class. But go ahead and download that, the last current version of 2016. So I did want to point that out and make sure that information is out there. There's also a lot of other fun things in here. One thing I do want to point out is that if you go into their samples tab, they have released something called the Wise Adventure Game. And it is a complete game project that you can implement your own music and sound effects. It is a fun kind of deeper dive, and certainly is a great way of getting information beyond the scope of the class. If you want to continue learning how music and sound effects work in the game, but they just released this very recently. And so I always want to throw that out there for people to check out. So that is the information I wanted to pass along for getting Wise installed. If you do have any questions, please let me know, but we will turn it over to the archive to discuss your assignments for week 3. Thank you very much. From the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016, and my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go. Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D platformer Wise setup and Angry Bots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There is a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the Wise project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch Wise and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other, and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise. And then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that, and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the sound banks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor Mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here, and we are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So you can, a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together. And we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist, Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives, the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play at one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time, though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all 3 of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that The application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right, so when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects: bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. Highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine. So we're going to hit import. I'll just go to project save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy Death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And Taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So I'm going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX Enemy Death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this Jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX Ouch. And the last one here is SFX Taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse. And this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. shot, health pickup, browse, health pickup, jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container, taunt. Select taunt random container. All right. Now I have messages. Seem to work.
Oh. Huh.
All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit generate. And when you hit generate, this message will pop up, and it says evaluation mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents. Resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this, and you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get into contact with us, and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about a minute long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they are very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, 8th notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition. And hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions. And other than that, have a good day. Thanks.